Kieran Tate knew something was off the second he sat down. The row felt too close to the stage, the seat cushions a little too worn for the VIP section he'd paid for. But before he could double-check his ticket, the woman beside him turned and his mind went completely blank. "Ah, you're in my seat." The words weren't rude, just confused, said with a slight laugh and a tilt of her head. She had stormy gray eyes and a baseball cap tugged low over soft brown curls. Her voice didn't match the sequins on her shirt that read "Nope" in glitter. She sounded smart, calm, kind of amused. Kieran glanced at the ticket in his hand. Row C, seat 12. She leaned toward him, holding up her own stub. "Row F. This is row F." He blinked, then laughed under his breath. "Well, I just turned into one of those people." She grinned. Maybe just a little. He should have gotten up, apologized, found his real seat. But something about the easy way she smiled made him pause. "I'll move," he said, standing halfway. "Unless you don't mind me being your accidental concert buddy for a few minutes?" She shrugged. "Only if you're not one of those people who scream-sings every lyric." "I don't scream-sing," he said, settling back down. "I professionally lip-sync." She laughed and it shook something loose in his chest. It had been a long time since he'd laughed like that, free, unplanned, real. "I'm Kieran," he said. "Juliet," she replied. "And don't make any Romeo jokes or I'm switching seats with the guy behind us." "Noted." He held his hands up in surrender and she turned back toward the stage as the lights dimmed. The crowd roared. The band walked on. He told himself he'd leave after the first song. He stayed through the entire set. Juliet didn't talk much, but when she did, it was sharp and funny. She didn't fawn over the band or try to be cute. She threw popcorn at the drunk guy behind them when he spilled beer on her jacket. She sang softly to the slow songs, not for anyone else, just for herself. Kieran couldn't stop glancing over at her. He was used to women noticing him first. He had the kind of face that got him attention and the kind of money that usually kept it. But Juliet didn't ask what he did, didn't lean over to flirt, didn't ask for a selfie. She was just there, real, and he didn't want the concert to end. After the final encore, the lights came up and people started to file out. Juliet stood and stretched, looking toward the exit. "Well," she said, "thanks for being a decent seat thief. You didn't even try to steal my soda." "I thought about it," he said, standing too. "But I figured popcorn assault was a real possibility." She smiled again. Not flirtatious, just warm. "I should probably go find my friend," she said, stepping into the aisle. "Wait," he paused. He never asked for numbers. He never needed to. But this felt different. "Can I see you again?" She blinked. "You don't even know anything about me." "I know enough. You're smart. Funny. You didn't care who I was. That's rare." Juliet tilted her head. "Should I know who you are?" He hesitated. Most people did. Or they Googled him the second they heard his name. Juliet just looked curious. He kind of liked that. "No," he said after a beat. "I don't think you should." She studied him for a second, then pulled a pen from her bag and scribbled something on his ticket stub. "My number. In case you want to professionally lip-sync again sometime." He looked down at the digits and grinned. "You sure you're not going to block me?" "I haven't decided yet." Then she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Kieran stood there for a moment, the stub still in his hand, heart beating way too fast for a man who closed multi-million-dollar deals without blinking. He walked out of the venue, smiling to himself. He never sat in the wrong seat. His life was scheduled, precise, mapped out to the minute. But tonight he did, and for the first time in years. He was glad something went wrong. Juliet Langston didn't expect him to call. Well, she sort of hoped, but men like that, tall, charming, with that cocky casual confidence, usually didn't follow up. Especially when you wore an old denim jacket and your best accessory was sarcasm. But 2 days later, she was leaving her bookstore shift when she saw him standing across the street. No assistant, no driver. Just Kieran, holding 2 coffees and looking like he'd walked off the cover of GQ. "You found me," she said, stepping onto the curb. "I bribed a security guy at the venue for your last name," he said, not even pretending to be subtle. "It was either that or wait outside until fate dropped you on the same street again." She took the coffee. Persistent. Very. He walked beside her down the sidewalk, quiet for a moment before he asked, "So, what do you do, Juliet Langston?" "I run the register at Pages and Paperbacks. It's a bookstore. Not very glamorous." "I like bookstores," he said. She glanced over. "So you're into books?" "Not really. But I like that you are." She stopped walking. He looked down at her, brows raised. "What? You're not normal." He leaned closer. "You're just realizing that now?" She laughed, shaking her head, and kept walking. "You didn't answer the question." "What question?" "What you do." He sipped his coffee. "I'm in real estate. I buy things. Build them. Sell them." "How vague and suspicious," she said. "I make a lot of money doing it." She gave him a look. "You say that like it's supposed to impress me. Does it?" "No. But I appreciate the honesty." He smiled wider. "So, dinner." Juliet paused, tempted. She wasn't good at this. She hadn't dated in over 2 years since her last relationship crashed and burned. But Kieran was different. He didn't pretend to be anything he wasn't, and he wasn't trying to impress her. He was just showing up. "Okay," she said. "But if you show up in a tux and take me to some caviar place, I'm out." "No tux. No caviar. Just me. And maybe some really good pasta." And he kept his word. That night, they sat in a quiet Italian place tucked behind a flower shop. He ordered her favorite wine without asking the price. He listened when she talked about her dad, her bookstore, her plans to open her own literary cafe someday. And when he kissed her goodnight, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't a power move. It was soft, intentional, something real. As he walked away, Juliet leaned against her front door, heart pounding like she was 16 again. She didn't know what this was yet. But she knew one thing for sure: the man who sat in the wrong row at a concert might just be the right one after all. Juliet stood at the back of the cafe, arms folded across her apron, watching the espresso machine sputter out its last breath. The thing had been touch and go for weeks, and now it gurgled like it had finally given up. She sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose just as her manager, Dana, walked past with a tray of croissants. "That machine's on its last legs," Dana muttered. "I'll call the repair guy again. If he ghosts me one more time, I'm dressing like a ghost and haunting his office." Juliet chuckled softly, but her eyes lingered on the machine. "We're barely keeping up with orders as it is. If it goes down for good." "Don't say it," Dana interrupted. "Let's just pretend caffeine isn't the only thing holding this place together." Juliet nodded, but her thoughts had already drifted elsewhere. Kieran hadn't called in over a week. Not that she expected anything. Their dinner had been amazing, but she wasn't naive. People had good nights all the time, said they'd be in touch, and then vanished into the ether of life and unread call logs. Still, it stung more than it should have. She turned back to the counter just as the bell over the door chimed. And there he was. Kieran walked in like he didn't know he'd just made her heart lurch. He wore dark jeans and a navy coat, his hands buried in the pockets. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on her, and then his face changed, softened. It wasn't a smile, not exactly, but it was something quieter, apologetic. She wiped her hands on a towel and stepped around the counter. "You're late," she said, keeping her tone even. "I know." He glanced around, then leaned in a little. "Can we talk? I'm working. I'll wait." Juliet narrowed her eyes but nodded toward a corner table. "Don't touch the biscotti. Dana counts them." He sat, and she tried to focus on steaming milk and ringing up orders, but every few minutes her gaze flicked to the corner where he sat with his hands wrapped around a paper cup. He didn't look impatient. If anything, he looked like he was sorting through 1,000 thoughts at once. Finally, Dana nudged her. "Go take your break. I can handle the rush." Juliet untied her apron and crossed the room. Kieran stood as she approached, but she waved him off and slid into the chair opposite him. "All right," she said. "Talk." "I didn't ghost you," he said right away. "I got pulled into something I couldn't ignore. Most people call when that happens." "I know. I should have. But it wasn't just any work thing. My father had a stroke." Juliet's expression shifted instantly. "Oh. He's stable now," Kieran continued. But it was bad. The kind of bad that makes you rethink everything. She sat back, absorbing that. I'm sorry. I didn't know. You couldn't have. He looked down at his cup. He and I haven't spoken in years. But when I got the call, I was on a flight within the hour. I didn't even pack. Juliet said nothing for a long moment. Then, why didn't you just tell me? Kieran leaned his elbows on the table. Because I didn't want that to be the reason you stopped answering when I finally did call. I didn't want pity or obligation. I wanted to earn another chance. She looked at him, really looked. He was different today. A little paler, less polished. His shirt collar was slightly wrinkled, and there was a tiredness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Did you? She asked. Did I what? Earn another chance? He hesitated. I don't know, but I want one. Not just to explain. To see you again. To get to know you better. The real parts. Not just the concert and the pasta. Juliet studied him. She wasn't someone who forgave easily. But he hadn't lied. He'd shown up. And there was something in his voice, something raw that chipped away at the wall she hadn't realized she'd rebuilt. I don't do casual, she said quietly. And I don't do disappearing acts. Then I won't disappear. She tapped her nails against the table once. Then twice. Fine. But if you vanish again, I'm sending Dana after you with a rolling pin. Fair, he said, and this time he did smile. Can I walk you out later? Juliet glanced toward the counter. Dana gave her a thumbs up without even looking away from the register. Yeah, she said. You can. Later that evening, the air was crisp as they stepped outside. The sun was low, casting gold across the storefronts. They walked in silence for a few blocks before Juliet broke it. Did you grow up around here? Kieran shook his head. No. Connecticut. But I've been in the city since college. And the real estate thing? My father's company. I didn't want it at first. But then I started flipping small buildings. Made my first $1 million by 26. After that, I built my own firm. Told him I'd never work under his name. Still angry with him? She asked. Not angry. Just tired of pretending he was someone he wasn't. He built an empire and lost a family doing it. Juliet glanced at him. You're not him. I try not to be. He stopped walking. But sometimes I wonder if I'm just repeating the same patterns with a better PR team. She turned to face him, arms crossed. Then don't. Don't repeat them. He looked at her like she'd said something he hadn't considered before. You make it sound easy. It's not. But it's simple. They stood there for a moment. The city moving around them. Loud and fast and indifferent, but this corner felt still. Like it existed outside the noise. I want to take you somewhere, Kieran said suddenly. Not tonight. But soon. Where? It's a surprise. But you'll need to pack something warm. She raised an eyebrow. Is this the part where I find out you're secretly unhinged and planning to axe murder me in the wilderness? No axes. Just snow. Maybe a fireplace. Julia paused, then nodded once. Okay. But if there's no hot chocolate, we're turning around. He laughed, and it wasn't polished or controlled, it was real. I promise hot chocolate. They parted ways at the subway, but something unspoken hung in the air between them. Something that felt like a beginning. As Juliet descended the stairs, she didn't look back. But she smiled the whole way home. The plane descended through a blanket of silver clouds, the kind that made the world below look like a secret waiting to be uncovered. Juliet pressed her forehead to the window, watching the mountains emerge sharp, snow-covered, endless. The private jet had been quiet for most of the flight, save for the occasional clink of glass from the bar cart, but now Kieran's voice broke the silence. You're not going to faint from altitude-induced anxiety, are you? She turned, refusing to look impressed by the plush leather seats or the champagne chilling in a crystal bucket between them. I'll faint when I see the bill for this jet. You didn't, he replied. I did. Juliet arched a brow. So where are we? Vermont, Kieran said. My family has a place up here. You mean your father? No, he said, his expression unreadable. I mean me. When they landed, A black SUV waited on the tarmac. The driver, an older man with a lined face and a slight limp, greeted Kieran with a nod and a quiet, "Nice to see you again, Mr. Tate." Juliet climbed into the passenger seat. Taking in the way, Kieran's jaw tightened slightly when the man said his name. He never called himself that. Not once. The drive wound through pine forests and past frozen lakes. The only sound the quiet hum of tires on snow-packed roads. When the house finally came into view, Juliet's breath caught. It wasn't a house. It was a lodge. Stone and cedar, tall windows, a wraparound porch half buried in snow. Smoke curled from the chimney and warm light spilled from the windows as if it were waiting just for them. "I thought you said you didn't do caviar," she said, stepping out into the cold. "Doesn't mean I can't do fireplaces," he replied. Inside, the house smelled like cedarwood and something faintly citrus. Juliet wandered through the open concept space, vaulted ceilings, exposed beams, a living room with a blazing hearth that looked like it belonged in a magazine. A Christmas tree still stood in the corner, undecorated but elegant, like someone had planned to finish it and never did. She ran her hand along the edge of a long wooden table. "Do people actually live here?" "Not anymore," he said, shrugging out of his coat. "It's been empty since the year before last. So why bring me?" "Because you said you liked quiet. And I wanted to show you something that wasn't a restaurant or a penthouse. Something that's mine." Juliet met his gaze. "You don't show this place to a lot of people, do you?" "No, never actually." She didn't press. She just nodded once and moved to the fireplace, holding her hands out toward the heat. Later, after they'd unpacked and changed into warmer clothes, he found her in the kitchen, barefoot, holding a jar of cinnamon and looking entirely too serious. "I thought we could bake something," she said. "Something real. Not catered." He opened a cabinet and pulled out a sack of flour. "You're full of surprises." "I could say the same about you," she replied, tying her hair back with a rubber band from her wrist. They baked apple hand pies from scratch. Halfway through, Juliet accidentally dropped the butter into the bowl too early and Kieran stirred in salt instead of sugar. They laughed loud, full-bodied, unfiltered, and when the pies finally came out uneven and slightly burnt on the edges, they ate them anyway, sitting on the floor by the fireplace. Kieran leaned against the brick, watching her lick cinnamon from her thumb. "I haven't done this in years," he admitted. "Burn pastries. Relaxed." She looked at him, really looked. "You don't strike me as someone who lets himself slow down." He shifted, stretching his legs out in front of him. "I don't. Not since I started the company. There's always something, another deal, another meeting, another person wanting to use you." Juliet chewed slowly, choosing her words. "And me? What do you think I want? That's what makes this different. You don't want anything from me. You just want me." She didn't respond. Instead, she reached for one of the burned pies and held it out to him. "To being terrible bakers." He clinked his against hers. "To firsts." The next morning, Juliet woke to the sound of snow falling against the windows and the scent of coffee brewing. She padded downstairs wrapped in a blanket, only to find Kieran sitting at the kitchen island with a pile of papers in front of him. He looked up, startled. "Did I wake you?" "No. Just got cold," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "What are you working on?" "Something I've been putting off," he said. "I bought a lot downtown last year. Thought I'd turn it into high rises. But then I remembered something you said." Juliet raised a brow. "I say a lot of things. You said you wanted a literary cafe. Something small. Yours." She froze, the mug halfway to her lips. "You bought that lot." "I did. But I don't want to build glass towers anymore. I want to build something that matters." She set the mug down, her voice low. "Are you saying you want to give it to me?" "No. I want to offer you a partnership. 50-50. I'll cover the construction, you handle the soul." Juliet swallowed. "You barely know me." "I know enough." She stepped back, torn between suspicion and wonder. "This feels like a test. Or a trap." "It's neither. It's a chance." They spent the rest of the day snowed in, watched a film on an ancient projector, played cards in front of the fire, She beat him at rummy 3 times, and he blamed the altitude each time. That night, as they stood on the balcony wrapped in blankets, Juliet looked up at the stars. "Why did you really bring me here?" He glanced at her, his voice low. "Because I wanted to know what it would feel like to stop pretending. To just be. And—" he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "It feels like this." She leaned into him, silent, because for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. And neither did he. Juliet stood at the edge of the rooftop, the city glittering below like a sea of stars trapped in glass. The wind tugged gently at the hem of her coat, and behind her, soft music drifted from an unseen quartet. The rooftop had been transformed. Warm lighting strung across steel beams, a long table set for 2 beneath a canopy of hanging orchids, and a view that stretched clear to the river. It was a world away from the quiet Vermont lodge, yet somehow it felt threaded to it like that snow-covered silence had been the prologue to this. Kieran stepped up beside her, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, the top button of his shirt undone. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "You sent a card," Juliet said, her voice even. "And a handwritten note. I figured it was either a proposal or a hostage situation." His mouth curved slightly. "You're not wrong." She turned to him fully now, eyes steady. "What is this, Kieran?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, not opening it, just holding it between them. "I bought this 2 years ago," he said. "Not for anyone. Just in case. Because I thought someday, eventually, I'd meet someone who would make me stop looking over my shoulder." Juliet's breath caught, but she didn't move. "I didn't open it until last week," he continued. "Not after our first date. Not after Vermont. After I walked past the bookstore and saw you laughing with a kid who dropped his hot chocolate. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You just existed like you always do, with nothing to prove and everything to give." He held the box out to her, still closed. "I'm not asking for a yes. I'm asking for your time. Your partnership. Your trust. I want to build the cafe with you. I want to build everything with you. And maybe one day, if it feels right, I'll open this." Juliet looked at the box, then back up at him. "Why risk this? You could have anyone. I don't want anyone. I want someone who doesn't care what my last name is. Someone who throws popcorn at drunk guys and tells me when I'm being a coward. Someone who didn't ask what I made until we were standing in a kitchen with flour in our hair." Juliet's eyes glistened, but she didn't blink them away. "I don't need to open that box to know how I feel about you," she said. "But I'm not pretending I'm not terrified." "Me too," he said. "But I'd rather be terrified with you than unbothered with anyone else." She reached out and closed his fingers gently around the box, then laced her hand with his. "Start with dinner." He squeezed her hand once. "Then dinner it is." They sat beneath the orchid canopy and the city faded into a distant hum. The meal was simple: roasted sea bass, lemon risotto, and a bottle of wine from a vineyard Juliet mentioned once, months ago, in passing. He remembered. Midway through the meal, she leaned forward, voice quiet. "You said something back in Vermont about wanting to stop pretending. What did you mean?" He looked at her, no hesitation this time. "That I'm tired of being the man who walks into rooms and lets everyone believe he's already won. I've lost things, people, time. I don't want to pretend anymore that I don't feel that." Juliet's gaze softened. "So what do you want to feel?" He set his fork down, reached for her hand across the table. "Like I'm home, and I haven't felt that in years. Not until you handed me your number on a concert ticket stub." She laughed, brushing her thumb along his knuckles. "Worst paper to write a number on. I almost threw it out." "I know," he said. "I kept it." Back at her apartment, Juliet paused in the hallway, the door to her place just inches away. He stood behind her, quiet. "Do you want to come in?" she asked. He stepped forward, resting his hand lightly on her shoulder. "Only if you want that." She turned. "I do." Inside, the space was warm and lived in. Books lined the walls, and a sleeping cat curled in a chair near the window. Juliet kicked off her shoes and dropped her keys into the bowl by the door. Kieran moved slowly, not out of hesitation but reverence. He wasn't the man who took what wasn't offered. And tonight, everything that was unfolding between them felt like a gift neither wanted to rush. "I thought about you a lot when I was away," he said, toeing off his shoes. Yeah, but not like some fairy tale. I thought about what it would mean to choose someone every day. Not for the way they make you feel, but for the way they make you want to be better. Juliet crossed the room and sat on the edge of her couch. "So what now?" "We built something," he said, joining her. "Not just the cafe. A life. Whatever that looks like." She rested her head against his shoulder. "I want that. But I want to do it on solid ground. Not fairy tales." "No fairy tales," he promised. "Just the truth." They sat there in the quiet, the city buzzing below them, the cat shifting in its sleep, the heartbeat of something real beginning to settle between them. 3 months later, the cafe opened. It wasn't grand. It didn't have velvet ropes or celebrity investors. But it had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a reading corner with mismatched cushions, and cinnamon scones that sold out by noon. The espresso machine gleamed beneath strings of paper lanterns, and behind the counter, Juliet stood with flour on her apron, directing staff with the ease of someone who'd found her rhythm. Kieran watched from the back corner, laptop closed, a coffee in hand. She caught his eye and nodded once. He smiled back, but didn't move. This was her moment. Outside, the sign above the door read, Langston and Tate. He hadn't asked her to change her name. She hadn't offered. But when they registered the cafe, she wrote them both down. That night, after closing, he found her leaning against the counter, exhausted and glowing. "You did it," he said. "We did it." He pulled something from his coat pocket. Not the velvet box this time, but a single key on a brass chain. "What's this?" she asked. "Our house," he said. "If you want it. It's not far. Big kitchen, lots of windows. I picked it for the light." She took the key, heart-thudding. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Juliet looked at him for a long time. Then she set the key down gently, stepped close, and cupped his face in her hands. "I never guessed I'd fall for the man who stole my seat at a concert. I never guessed I'd meet the woman who'd make me forget every reason I ever built walls." She kissed him then, slow and certain, as if to say, "This is real. This is earned. This is ours." Outside, the city moved on, but inside, beneath a row of hanging lanterns, 2 people stood in the soft light of everything they'd built, choosing each other without hesitation. And for the first time in either of their lives, it felt exactly like home. The first sign that something had changed came in the form of an envelope hand delivered to the cafe by a man in a gray wool coat who left as quickly as he'd arrived. Juliet stood behind the counter, apron dusted with cocoa powder, when she opened it. Inside was a crisp letterhead bearing a name she hadn't seen in over a decade. Langston and Dorsey, her mother's old publishing firm. Her fingers paused on the edge. This can't be right. Kieran looked up from the corner table where he'd been going over blueprints for their expansion next door. He crossed the cafe in 3 long strides, reading the tension in her posture before she spoke. "They want to meet," she said, holding the letter toward him. "Apparently someone submitted a manuscript under my name. Short stories. Pieces I wrote years ago." Kieran read the letter carefully, his brows drawing together. "And you didn't send it?" "I haven't touched those stories since college." "Then who did?" Juliet's breath left her slowly. "My dad." She didn't need to explain. Kieran had met him once, quiet, soft-spoken. The kind of man who remembered everyone's birthday and kept every note Juliet had ever scribbled on a napkin. If anyone had those stories, it was him. "You're going to that meeting," Kieran said, his voice low but firm. "I haven't written anything new in years." "Then you'll start again." "What if they hate it?" "They won't. And if they do, it won't change what you're capable of." She looked up at him, surprise flickering across her face. "I know what it's like to put something away because it hurt too much to look at," he added. But I also know you didn't build this cafe by accident. You built it because you wanted stories to matter again. When she finally nodded, he kissed her forehead and said, "Go get your dream." Days later, Juliet sat in a glass-walled office overlooking Central Park, listening as an editor explained how her stories had lingered in their slush pile until someone finally read one and then devoured the rest in a single sitting. "We don't usually publish short fiction anymore," the editor said, "but your voice is unforgettable." She left the office with a contract in her bag and tears in her eyes. Kieran was waiting on the sidewalk with 2 lattes and a quiet smile. "Well?" he asked, handing her one. "They want to publish the collection. All of it." He didn't say anything at first, just wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her into the kind of kiss that said everything. That night, they celebrated not with champagne or glittering parties, but on the cafe rooftop, lit by strings of mismatched bulbs and a candle in a slice of almond cake. Their staff had surprised her with the setup, and even Dana had gotten choked up when Juliet made a toast. "To the people who believe in us when we forget how." The following month, construction began on the bookstore expansion. Juliet had curated every title herself, each one handpicked to reflect the kind of stories that had shaped her. Kieran oversaw the build, but she noticed how he stepped back more often lately, letting others take the lead. The empire he'd once clung to with both hands no longer defined him. He was redefining power as presence, not control. One afternoon, as she rearranged a display table, he came up behind her and slipped something into her apron pocket. "Don't open it yet," he said. "Wait until after close." She gave him a sideways glance but obeyed. That evening, when the last customer left and the lights dimmed, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Not a proposal, not a grand reveal, just a note, written in his unmistakable scrawl. "You once told me you didn't believe in fairy tales, but I think maybe we've been writing our own all along. No castles, no pumpkins, just truth and grit and late nights and burnt pies. I don't need a crown. I just want to be your partner in books, in business, in life. If you're still willing to build something with me, meet me at the place where this all started." Juliet didn't need a second to figure it out. The concert hall was mostly empty when she walked in. The lights were low, the stage dark, but one spotlight glowed softly over a single row F, seat 12. Kieran was already sitting there, dressed in jeans and a navy sweater. No tux, no theatrics, just him. She approached quietly, heart pounding. "I almost didn't come," she said. "I would have waited," he replied. "Even if you didn't." She sat beside him, the silence tender, familiar. He reached into the seat between them and opened his palm. The velvet box he'd once promised not to open until the time was right. "Is it time?" she whispered. "I think it always was. I just had to catch up." He opened the box. Inside was a ring unlike anything she'd imagined, no glinting diamonds, no oversized sparkle. Just a simple gold band with a small etched inscription on the inside. "Row F, seat 12. She stared at it, then at him. "You remembered." "I remember everything." Tears slipped down her cheeks, unexpected and unstoppable. "I don't need grand," she said. "I know," he replied. "But you deserve it anyway." When he knelt, he didn't make a speech. He just looked into her eyes and said, "Say yes." She didn't hesitate. Yes. They married 6 weeks later in the garden behind the cafe, surrounded by books, fairy lights, and the people who had become their family. Her father walked her down the aisle. Dana cried through the entire ceremony. And when they kissed, it didn't feel like the beginning. It felt like the place they'd both been walking toward their whole lives. The cafe continued to thrive. Her book hit shelves that winter and quickly rose through the literary charts. But she didn't care about the numbers. What mattered was that people were reading again, feeling again. Kieran stepped fully out of his father's shadow, dissolving the last of the Tate empire and founding a new firm built on sustainability, community, and ethics. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. And for the first time, he felt proud of what his name stood for. They bought a brownstone with a library Juliet filled to the ceiling and a kitchen where they burned at least one meal a week. They traveled. They stayed home. They danced in the living room with the lights off and the record player on. And on the night of their first wedding anniversary, she found him in the nursery, painting clouds on the ceiling. "We're not even halfway done," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Good," he replied, dipping the brush into blue. "I want this life to take as long as possible." Their daughter was born that spring. They named her Eliza, after Juliet's favorite character in a book she had loved as a child. Kieran held her for the first time and whispered, "You're going to have your mother's fire, and I'm going to be terrified every day." Juliet laughed through her tears and kissed the top of his head. They never did finish the clouds on the ceiling. But life, they discovered, wasn't about finishing. It was about choosing. Every single day. And they chose each other. Always.